in Gervans. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of the history and the thread that brings us to the creation of the Crozes appellation in 37?
Yeah. Like you say, the size of the vineyard in our area is much more confidential than in the south of the appellation. But the vineyard has been present for a very long time in Crozes-Hermitage and in Gervans. But the appellation Crozes-Hermitage has been recognized only in 1937. And at this time, there was only the vines planted in the village of Crozes-Hermitage, which were allowed to produce some Crozes-Hermitage.
And so that's the same. So that's the backside of the hill of Hermitage, and that's where Pontaix, your Les Pontaix, and Clos les Cornirets is.
Yeah, exactly. Our vineyard is in a small valley just behind the hill of Hermitage, on the south exposition, and it's where we have Les Pontaix and Clos les Cornirets.
And so what is unique about that compared to, because that was the first, it represents today, it's 25% of the entire Crozes appellation, that area, or maybe 30?
Yeah. Yes, today the 5 villages in the north of Hermitage represent around 25% of the total size of the appellation. And it's mainly because in this area, the vines are only on the slopes, because the plain is not recognized in appellation. So that's why the vineyard is more confidential, yeah? And it's a different way of viticulture.
So it's the same, so the bedrock there is in large part is the same granite as you find on Hermitage. What's the big difference between that section of Crozes? What makes it so different from Hermitage itself?
Hermitage is the area in the Rhône Valley where the valley is the most narrow. So the vineyard of Hermitage is protected from the influence of the north wind. It's faced to the south. In Crozes-Hermitage, which is just 5 kilometers in the north, the valley is much more open. So we have an influence of the north wind, which develop a cooler microclimate. I just mean the granite we have in Crozes-Hermitage is the same origin than we have in the west part of Hermitage in Les Bessards, but the microclimate is different.
Today, I mean, back in the day when Hermitage was created, the reason it is so special is because it is protected. It's full south facing, and I mean, you've got a mix of some other terroirs. It's not just Les Bessards, obviously. There's some other different, really complex terroir on the hill, but it's more. Historically, it was much more consistent. The growing season year to year, because it was protected. Is that part of the reason that it was, has that amazing reputation?
Yeah, the concentration of the wine from Hermitage are composed from the quality of the subsoil, but also of the influence of the exposition. Yeah.
And so, I remember standing up about halfway, maybe 3/4 of the way up Les Pontaix with you and looking out, and you're not that far away from Cornirets. You've got your terraces there that go back a long way. Some of those terraces you pointed out to me in the hills go back to the 1800s. Maybe they were farmed various ways, not necessarily grapes exclusively, but that area was farmed. And I remember looking out, and you were showing me how that the Rhône brings in a very consistent, fairly cool temperature that comes in there, and which is, so even if the exposition is in some places south or southwest, you still have a much cooler microclimate. Is that accurate?
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, as the valley is more open, yeah, we have this influence from the north wind, which will refresh this area when the north wind is present. Yeah.
So are there disadvantages to that, or what are the advantages? What are the pluses and the minuses to that type of microclimate?
Good question. No, I mean,
no, I'm thinking of the changes in the climate because, you know, maybe 15 years ago or 20 years ago, when maybe it wasn't quite as warm consistently, I'm assuming that was not necessarily a big advantage for your father or maybe your grandfather every year.
Yeah, yeah. We used to have probably later harvest 15, 20 years ago, but today with the evolution of the climate, the difference of harvest between the north and the south of the Appellation is much more close.
I remember you talking about the 19 vintage, which we're going to taste some wines from in a bit, and you said that you really had to, the harvest had to be done very quickly because things were happening very fast. I mean, it was a very warm, dry growing season, and you kind of had to hustle to get everything in at the right moment, so you had the right balance. So I jumped ahead to the terroir because it's just hard to resist talking about that. But I want to step back just a bit and talk about, you know, the transition. So the appellation was created in Crozes, your grandfather and father in 37. And then in, you know, let's say from the 70s to say 2000, let's say 51 was when the big expansion of the appellation of Crozes happened, and that includes some of that great terroir down in the south. That's kind of the glacial, you know, glacial debris, the rounded limestone galets that you find in, you know, at Talabert and in Les Chassis and Roche du Blanc. That area was added so that was a big expansion of the Crozes-Hermitage appellation. But what did that also do? You were explaining to me that really changed the culture of farming for a lot of the people in the area. So can you talk about what happened? Because your grandfather used to plow exclusively with horses. Your dad did that, you told me, when he was growing up. But then in the 70s, there was a real change in the commercial aspect to the Crozes appellation. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. In 1951, the appellation increased from 1 village to 11 towns, which has been allowed to produce some Crozes-Hermitage. So the vineyard has been developed very fast in the south part of the appellation, in the plain of Les Chassis, because in this area it's much more easy to cultivate the vines with mechanization. That's why today the bigger part of the vineyard is situated in this area. Yeah.
So during that period of time, if I remember historically, there was a because a lot of that area is much easier to farm, there was this mechanization, and you know, where your family and father and grandfather first were working, it's terraces, it's a lot of it's handwork, you can't basically get a tractor, you know, traditional farming was very hard. And this type of farming that took place, a lot of it in the south, not because there was any problem with it, but because it's more flat, it's plateau in many places, that it brought down the cost of the wines overall quite a bit. And to compete, a lot of the appellation became conventional and, you know, did things in a different way, including at one point your father changed to more conventional farming for some of the vineyards that you were able to do that.
Yeah.
And because he felt it was the only way to compete with the changes that were happening across the Appellation. I think it was, and it's not dissimilar to some other aspects of France. You came in, I think there was a split in 2000 to 2002. There was the family split the property,
Yeah.
and you and your father and your sister took 7 hectares from the original property, and you ended up taking over the property really full time. I think it was 2002.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And so at that time, I know you said you had some hard conversations with your father and your sister, because your mind wanted to return to a different way of doing things based on some experiences you had in school, some of your friends, some of your stages. Can you talk about that? What your vision for the property and how that transition came about?
Yeah. Yeah, I came back on the family estate in the year, at the beginning of the year 2000, and due to my experience I had before during the study and my first professional experience, I really think that to get the best expression of our terroir, we need to develop again much more natural way of viticulture. So that's why we decided to stop to use the herbicide and chemicals in the vineyard, but it needs time because we have lots of old vines and you have to reacclimate the vines to cultivate the soil and to get the life in the subsoil we had lost during the 20-25 years before.
So I remember you telling me a story that, you know, that your father wasn't against this, but at the same time, it was a conversation that you had. And I remember you telling me a story that I just loved about he really enjoyed when you brought back the use of horses in the vineyards, because he remembered doing that with his father. And, you know, it was something, and I remember you smiled when you talked about it. You know, unfortunately your father's no longer with us, but you said that really made him happy to use the horses again, and like Cornirets and because I was just curious, because he obviously had done that with his father. He'd done this type of farming, and then he switched, and unfortunately he's not here to see a lot of the amazing changes that you've done over this, you know, over this 20 years or so. But still, I thought that was representative of a light bulb coming on for him and feeling really attached to, you know, the long history of your family farming that area.
Yeah, I think he used chemical by necessity to compete with the context of the appellation in the years 70 and 80. But I think that, like me, he had the conviction that to get a good expression of the terroir and to have some vines healthy, it's much more a natural way of viticulture will help us to have this quality of vines. Yeah.
You know, I unfortunately the one negative I love, it's so amazing to be standing in those vineyards, Les Pontaix, Clos des Cornirets. I mean, it really is. I mean, it's, first off, it's amazing, and we'll talk about the wines. I'm spending too much time, but it's hard to imagine thinking about farming them. And I know that you have now taken on some of the abandoned terraces that need to be restored just above the Clos Cornirets, on that really steep terraced slope. And I mean, it's, if you look at that and you see the granite sticking out and how steep it is, it almost seems crazy that people were farming, you know, on this, because it's, you can see why people preferred to work on the flat, you know, flatter lands with where you can use tractors, etc. But I know you've started to basically recapture some of those terraces, and I think it will be kind of amazing over time to see how that project takes place. I know it's Herculean work to do, because it's so steep. I've watched people and talked to people about it. It's almost as much building, doing masonry work as it is vineyard work, because you've got to really kind of piece these things together. But still, it's a remarkable place to work. So maybe the next thing, maybe we should dive into talking about some wines, and then we'll come back. I'm sure we're going to keep returning to talking about the vineyards and some of your farming and your vinification methods. But I want to dive first into a couple of these 19 whites. You make a very small quantities of a number of whites. And the first one that I have in my glass is really become one of my favorites. It's the Saint-Peray that you make. And
Yep.
I just like your Crozes, because we've been talking about Crozes-Hermitage and, the appellation of Crozes. Your Saint-Peray, first off, it's a tiny appellation, but also you have a very unique, situation in Saint-Peray, because you have the two very different vineyards there that complement each other, that very few people have both. Can you talk a little bit about your 6 barrels or so of Saint-Peray?
Yeah, with pleasure. In Saint-Peray, we have two family of terroir. The granite part of the appellation, which is just next to the appellation neighbors Cornirets, and in the center of the village we have a hill with limestone, and we are lucky to have one plot on each terroir. So we have 0.2 hectare on the granite and 0.3 on the limestone. Yeah, exactly.
So the one side is the limestone that's below the ruins of the Chateau Crussol.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just.
And then the other is on the granite right next to Cornirets. Is that right? The edge.
Yeah.
So what is the two components? What did the two components give to your 100% Marsanne Saint-Peray?
The plots on the vineyard will develop all the intensity and the generosity of the Saint-Peray, and the limestone will add the minerality and the tension we are looking for a Saint-Peray.
And how do you vinify this wine? What's the élevage?
So the Saint-Peray is vinified and aged in cask, mainly barrels, but we also use some demi-muid, and we age on lees during 1 year before bottling.
And it's mostly older barrels. I think you have a very small percentage of new,
yeah,
which you don't sense at all. But the thing that's amazing, because 19 was a very warm vintage. I mean, it was a dry growing season and a warm vintage. But this wine doesn't feel heavy at all. It has a very nice. I mean, I don't want to say it's super sharp, but at the same time, it's got this beautiful balance and texture to it. There's a lovely florality, and at the same time, there's this kind of this just I don't know, I'd say kind of white and yellow pitted fruits that are very kind of vibrant.
Yeah, we have been lucky in 2019 because it's a very hot vintage, but in the Northern Rho we get some small rain in August, and this rain temperate the dry climate we have all the summer. And I think it helps to preserve some freshness in the whites. But also the date of harvest has been very important in 2019 because the ripeness was going very fast at the beginning of September. Yeah? So
also, you've also mentioned, and I'm assuming it's the same for these vineyards that even though it was in general a pretty dry, warm growing season, you know, that the old vines that go down into both the granite and the limestone, they were able, it seems, to find some type of little bits of moisture that was available to them during that harvest, including that little bit of rain that came.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And
the old Marsanne will find some humidity in the rocks during the drier part of the summer. So they will not develop. They did not develop any stress because of a lack of water during this summer. Yeah, that's why we preserve a good balance in the wine. Yeah, I think.
Well, I think the vinification and mostly the older barrels, I think that tiny bit of new wood also, you know, gives it a little bit of just a tiny bit of structure. It doesn't. I mean, the barrel doesn't give any. I don't get any of the oak flavor, but I do think it gives it a little bit of a backbone. You know, that kind of helps the Marsanne a little bit. Gorgeous, really gorgeous. It's got a beautiful texture. The finish is super, you know, is super clean, and yeah, really successful. It's I feel like it's a little bit, I'm just thinking in my mind of the 18, I think the 19 is maybe a little bit tighter wound than the 18. I feel like the 18 was a little bit more open. I don't know if that, that's just, I haven't had the 18 in a long time, but that's kind of, as I'm tasting that, it's the interesting thing, thinking of it.
Today we still have the minerality and the citrus still be present. But I think with times we will get the right fruit coming and the complexity will coming in the next month.
When you say citrus, yeah, it makes me think. I feel like there's a little bit of Meyer lemon there too. That's present. So the next wine that we've got is kind of I describe it as you've got an entry level Crozes Blanc and an entry level Crozes Rouge. And for the white, it's obviously the 19 vintage. These just arrived. And this comes from a couple of different parcels, all of them right around your vineyards in Crozes. And you've got, I think, 3 different parcels for this, if I'm not mistaken. 3, 4?
Yeah, almost 3. Yeah, exactly.
So, and if I remember correctly, you have a wide difference between the harvest dates between the different parcels, like almost 6-7 days to get it right.
Yeah, Hauterives White is a blend of 60% Marsanne and 40% Roussanne. So we have 3 different plots for this cuvée, mainly on Gervans and Crozes-Hermitage. And the nature of the soil is different. We have some loess, which are some sable, yeah?
Sandy, kind of sandy.
Some sand, yeah. And we also have some clay and limestone for the Marsanne. So the ripeness will be different in these 2 kinds of terroir. Yeah?
And what are the expositions? Are some of these, they're a little bit higher up, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, we have some plots. The whites are mainly at the foot of the hill. So we will preserve more freshness in this part of the vineyard. And we also have some loess, which are more west north exposition. Also to preserve a good freshness. Yeah, Hauterives White is typical from the white Crozes-Hermitage from the north part of the appellation. We have very nice white flavor taste and good balance between the volume and the freshness in the mouth. Yeah.
It's got a very it's very area. There's a very kind of airiness to it. It's not as intense as your your Pontet or is concentrated, it's got a lot more. It's more open. But as you said, there's kind of some white. Again, there's kind of white flowers, white kind of pitted fruits, maybe a little bit of yellow, but I feel like there's more white in this. There is a good minerality, and there seems to be, for me, there's almost a hint of a spiciness to it almost, or I don't know if that makes sense. There's something that gives it a little bit of kind of definition. And the élevage on this?
So for this cuvée, it's vinified and aged in tank, and mainly in stainless steel. Yeah.
And that's kind of to just preserve that airy quality to the wine.
Yeah, we age the wine over lees during 8 months to preserve all the freshness of the aromatic, and to keep this balance. Yeah.
No, it's really it's outstanding. You know, we're going to taste the Pontet in a second. It's not a extraordinarily long wine, but it's got beautiful kind of vibrant fruit, and it's I mean, it's beautifully balanced. That's what I mean, both these first two that we've tasted, the whites, if I think about the vintage, and you know, I've been tasting recently, I think, you know, last few weeks we had some discussions with Charlene Pinson and Vincent Domp, you know, Chablis, tasting a lot of 19 also, and I'm feeling 19 whites are going to be another surprising vintage, you know, for white wines, that people are going to be surprised at the balance that the wines have, even though we're looking at these vintages and growing seasons that are warmer.
Yeah, it has been a very warm summer, but we have been able to preserve nice freshness in the wine. Yeah?
Nice tension. Let's go to the Les Pontaix Blanc, and this is one of your you know, one of your most important vineyards. Both in that you've got a good sized vineyard, and it's a unique vineyard for me, because I loved walking, and I love showing people the different layers of terroir that you can find in this vineyard, and then you can go next door to Clos des Cornirets and, you know, see just the pure granite. But here you've got a mix of all kinds of things, and the white is very different from the section that you have your Syrah. Can you talk about where the white comes from and kind of the unique situation of this vineyard?
Yeah, we have a very nice complexity of subsoil in the area of Les Pontaix. Our vineyard is 3.5 hectares, and Les Pontaix White is situated on the top of a hill, where we have the connection of the hill of Les Pontaix with the hill of Les Cornirets, which is just behind. So on Les Pontaix White, we have the granite subsoil, which is on the top of the hill. And as this part of the vineyard is faced to the east, we will have some, at the middle of the parcel, we have some loess, which are on the top of the granite. It's some sand which have been deposited here with times.
And you've got some very old vines on this hill.
Yeah, this vineyard has been planted by my grandfather, so it's around 70 years old vines. So it's our oldest vines of Marsanne in Crozes-Hermitage. Yeah? And
yeah, I just was there's an intensity to this wine. There's kind of a real, it's the attack and kind of the structure of the wine. It's more structured than the previous two wines, but I'm just thinking of even the comparison to the Hauterives. It's a very different type of white. What gives it that kind of that concentration and that, and it seems to have a real kind of a burst of freshness to it. What do you feel that comes from?
For me, Les Pontaix White is a nice illustration that Marsanne may develop some very nice and complex white wine if it's planted on the right subsoil. And this subsoil of granite and loess are a very, very nice place for Marsanne. So we have a very hot vineyard because it's on the hill, but like it turns on the east exposition, we have some freshness during the morning in the summer, which will compete with the slopes of the vineyard. You know?
Yeah, it's got a real kind of, I feel like this one finishes with more kind of a minerality and a saltiness to it. There's more tension from start to finish. It's what makes it a much longer on the palate. And it's kind of sneaky in how long it is. Yeah, again, I feel like this is a tighter wound version of this than the 18. I feel like the 18s were a little bit more open, and that the 19s just seem to have this real tension to them. The élevage on this, is this similar to the Saint-Péray?
Yes, it's very similar to the Saint-Péray. We use barrels and demi-muid. It's about the same proportion of New Hock, about 15%, just to get a good ripeness of the wine, but not to have too much toasty notes. And it's vinify and age in the cask on the lees during 1 year.
And if I remember correctly too, even though you said this is an east facing vineyard, a kind of the exposure slightly twisted. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
This you said you harvest. This is always your first plot to harvest, typically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We used to pick Les Pontaix 1 week before Hauterives White. Yeah. Because of the nice exposition and the yield, which is also less important in this vineyard.
Wow. I was going to say to talk about your Hermitage Blanc, because you make a tiny bit, but why don't we talk about the two Hermitage at the very end? And let's dive into the red Crozes, and then we'll maybe just do just to keep kind of on the theme of Crozes-Hermitage to start with. So switching gears, the first wine is still from the 19 vintage, and it's your Hauterives Crozes-Hermitage, which is your entry level Crozes-Hermitage Rouge, and it's 2019. I really think this is, I remember we did a tasting. You came to the States for the first time. You know, it seems like a million years ago, before the you know, the lockdown and the pandemic, and then, you know, the fact that we can't travel. We were so lucky to have you come and do a series of tastings here on the East Coast. We went to Ohio and out to California, and we had some really great tastings. And I remember at a number of different stops, there were people who tasted your Hauterives Crozes-Hermitage Rouge and were dumbfounded, because they were like, how can this wine be so outstanding for such a reasonable price? Because it is, I mean, it's an entry level wine, and it is not an entry level wine. Can you talk about why it's not really an entry level Crozes-Hermitage? what is kind of very unique about this?
Thanks to the history we have in the appellation Crozes-Hermitage until 3 generations, we have a vision of Crozes-Hermitage, which is a serious and intense wine. And I did not imagine our first Crozes-Hermitage to be too much light and easy wine. So in this cuvée, we decided to use some vines from both origin of the appellation. So 60% of the vineyard is situated in the south part of the appellation, on the plain of Les Chassis, on the alluvionnaire glaciation subsoil, yeah.
That kind of the glacial debris, the rounded kind of limestones. You're in the area that's kind of, you're near Talabert, right? If I'm not mistaken, in that section, general section?
Yeah, our 2 plots are situated in the village of La Roche-de-Glin, exactly. And the 40%, the over 40% of the vineyard are situated on the north part of the appellation at the foot of the granite hill. And it's the complexity of these 2 origins will develop all the character of the wine. Yeah.
So you get kind of some of the freshness and tension of the granite of that northern section, and then what the southern gives what, a little more kind of a little more open, plusher style of Syrah.
Yeah, Les Chassis will develop quite generous red with very ripe red fruit, and with lower acidity. And the reds from the foot of the granite in the north will develop some very delicate and fresh red wines. And it's very interesting to have them together, because the granite will add some freshness and some tension in the mouth you will not be able to have only in the south.
So this is 19, and I know this is a little bit of a unique vintage for you because you actually have more of the north granite section in this version, because there was that early July hailstorm in the south that really didn't hurt the quality really, but really hurt the quantity for your vineyards down there, for everybody's vineyards in the area, for some of our good friends and your good friends that also have vineyards down there. So there's a higher percentage of the north in this 19 version, and it does have a very lifted quality to it. There is kind of a nice bright fruit to it. And the other thing I remember you telling me about is that when you first started with your father and sister in 2001-ish, was when you were planting the vineyards down here, because the vines down there are younger. But the thing you pointed out to me is that you used much higher density plantations than is the norm. You use more something that's akin to what you would do in the north than down in the south. So your density is much higher than a lot of your neighbors. Is that correct?
Yeah.
To give you more concentration and
our practice of viticulture in the family has always been based on a high density of plantation, because we have the conviction that to produce some intense wine, you need a high density of plantation. So on the hill, in the vineyard of Les Pontaix and Clos les Cornirets, we are around 7,500 vines per hectare. And when we develop a vineyard in the plain, we wanted to develop an easier vineyard with mechanization, but to preserve a good density of plantation. So here we are around 5,500 vines per hectare, which is around 30% higher than one of what the winemaker used to do in this area. And thanks to the density of plantation, we will have less bunches per vines. So each bunches will be better fed by the vines in this way.
And the vinification for this wine, because wow, it's as I say, it's got beautiful fruit. It's not at all heavy. It's really got a vibrancy to it that I really love. It doesn't feel heavy at all, so I really feel like you've got that tension and that freshness and kind of acidity that you talked about coming from the granite part of the north. It's really outstanding. It's a really exciting wine for the money.
To preserve all the quality of the fruit in a so hot vintage than 2019, we used to pick everything by hand. So when the berries arrive to the winery, they are desteamed, and then we drop them in concrete tank for the vinification. And we also age this wine in concrete to keep the freshness without the influence of oak.
But you still get in the concrete, you get that oxidation anyway, but without the wood influence. So it's actually a great vessel for Syrah, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
It's gorgeous, really gorgeous.
And we also use a very low quantity of sulfur also to preserve all the freshness of these aromas.
Yeah, no, I know you like to use very little sulfur across the board on your wines. It's not zero, at the end of the day, but you, even during vinification, you use very little, if any, until after mallow, and then you adjust with very small amounts. I mean, it's never something that's super present. We've got a bunch of wines and a couple of my favorite to talk about, so I need to accelerate, not go fast because we got plenty of time, but I really am excited to talk about the Les Pontaix and the Clos Cornirets, and we're changing gears because with these two wines, we're on the 18 vintages, the current release. The Hauterives is typically a little bit ahead. That was 19. And the Les Pontaix, again, is one of, I think, your really signature vineyards, just like for white, for red. And I just think it's amazing to have these two wines, the Pontaix and the Clos Cornirets, right next to each other. But I mean, literally, you're looking at 10, 15 yards between the vineyards, maybe 20. You've got that beautiful old tree that sits between them, but they're so different in terroir. I mean, it's like the blend of terroir for this red section is maybe one of the more complex. It brings together in many ways all of the different terroirs that you can find in the Northern Rho. Can you talk about the red vineyard here? And from kind of top to bottom, all the different layers that you encounter.
Yeah, in our area, in the north part of Crozes-Hermitage, the nature of the subsoil is mainly granitic. But in this small valley, to go to the village of Crozes-Hermitage, we also have some clay and limestone, which are in the foot of the hill of granite. And it's exactly the situation of Les Pontaix. We are just in front of the granite. It's a hill which is less important than the granite hill behind. And here we have clay and limestone with different density of limestone in the part of vineyard, you know.
You've got, you know, in my mind, I'm looking at that cutout of it, and you've got kind of the section that's got the small rounded limestone stones that are mixed in with the clay, right?
Yeah.
There's a layer of that, and it varies from spot to spot how deep some of that is. You know, in some parts the granite is closer or much farther down. You've got very deep layers of that. As you go up the hill, then you get some of that loess that we've encountered already in the white, and it kind of is this crazy mix that depends on exactly where you are in the vineyard. And then the other thing that I remember standing in the middle of that vineyard on the slope is there's always seems to be a breeze coming down. You're looking down at the village of Crozes-Hermitage to your left, and then to the right, you've got, in the distance, you've got the Rhone River, and that's where that, you know, that wind is coming from, and that gives it that freshness. So what about harvest date for this compared to, you know, some of the other wines? Is it later? How does it situate? Can you talk about the 18 vintage in particular, and also this site?
2018 is, I may say, the first vintage after 18 and 2000, where we have a very hot summer. So the date of harvest was much more earlier than when we used to do. We picked the grapes in the middle of September, between the 10 to the 15th of September, which is quite early for this area. And we have a very nice ripeness at the middle of September. Yeah.
And the élevage for your red here, your two top reds?
Yeah, so the process for Les Pontaix, the grapes are distilled, it's vinified in concrete, and then we age in some cask we call demi-muit, which are 600 liters.
And there's again a small percentage of new wood here?
It's about 20% of new oak, yeah. But as the size of the cask is bigger than the barrels, the balance of the oak is very soft in the wine. Yeah?
So this, to me, you've got this kind of it's really bright red fruits. There's definitely a broader mouthfeel than the Hauterives. It's also a different vintage, but at the same time, the Hauterives is just a little bit more fruity forward. This is a little bit broader. There's structure, but the tannins are very kind of harmonious and smooth. But again, I feel like there's a vibrancy to the fruit here. A little bit of a spiciness to it at the same time, but I feel there's an amazing harmony to it, and in no way would, in my mind, I say this is an extraordinarily ripe or overripe vintage.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have around the same level of alcohol than the first red we have before, Hauterives. But the aromatic is very different. It's typical from Crozes-Hermitage, situated in the north part. Very nice red fruit, ripe fruit, but still be fresh, and with a good intensity. We have a nice volume in this wine, but on Les Pontaix we preserve a good acidity, which let us imagine how long we may age this wine. Yeah.
No, it's definitely got a future. There's no question about that. It's a really kind of exciting, exciting wine. You did a tasting today on this cru, correct?
We had a tasting of 11 vintage of Les Pontaix from 2018 to 2008, and it was very interesting to see how the wine has been able to age, and also in the vintage, which may be qualified as lighter. Yeah, very nice evolution with times.
Great. No, that's that I was jealous to hear about that I couldn't participate.
Yeah. Crozes-Hermitage, I think Crozes-Hermitage is not necessarily famous for wine which may be able to age, and Les Pontaix is a nice demonstration that in our terroir, the Crozes-Hermitage may be interesting to have in the cellar for several years.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you obviously know there with some of our friends, you know, the obviously Alain Graillot, and there are some amazing examples of terroir in different sectors. The Raymond Rohr wines and the ones that you just mentioned, your Les Pontaix. There are some of these amazing terroirs and growers that I think are raising the bar and have been for a long time of what great Crozes-Hermitage and the top terroirs in the hands of really, you know, talented growers and farmers can do. It's a really amazing terroir, and that's going to be really fun to follow these going forward. And we've got some great vintages, you know, that we're tasting today and that have just arrived at the moment. These are really extraordinary vintages, a series of them in the area. So it's going to be fun to follow those going forward.
Yeah.
So, Clos les Cornirets, this magical, you know, kind of the vision of what a lot of people think of the Northern Rhone, these really impossibly small, complicated granite terraces that, you know, many of which were abandoned at one point because they were, particularly after the war or during the war, and when people came back, because they were so hard to work. But there is a beauty to them and a uniqueness to them. And this is a monopole that you have. And it's right next to Les Pontaix. And it's your oldest vines of Syrah. And can you talk about what this terroir does and what is so special about this site? I also want to talk briefly because in this vineyard and the ruins just above that, you know, that you're starting to recapture, you have I'm always fascinated in different parts of France by the different stone structures in the vineyards. You know, the cabotte that you have in Burgundy and you know, and in your region, in this area, they're Les Cabanons, if I'm not mistaken. You've got a beautiful one. We'll talk about the wine in a second, but can you talk about? I know you've got one that is in renovation on the upper slope, which is still kind of it's in renovation or maybe thinking about being renovated because it's still in kind of ruins. But the one down below is gorgeous. What were those used for? Because I just think it's a kind of a neat story. People I think don't realize how far people came with their animals and sometimes there to work the vineyards.
Yeah, in the oldest part of the vineyard, we still have some cabanon de vigne, and this is like a small house of stones, and the viticulture, the winemaker use this to keep the horse during the night when he did not finish the work in the parcel. So in our vineyard, we have 3 different cabanons, and it's mainly present in the whole part of a vineyard. Yeah.
The oldest sites is where you find them.
Yeah, and on the granite hill where is situated Clos les Cornirets, we used to have much more vines before. That's why we still have lots of terraces which are not replanted today, but they have very nice potential. Yeah.
So let's talk about this vineyard and the wine, because it's an amazing, I really think it's an amazing wine, and it's so very different from Les Pontaix. Can you talk about what is special about these granite terraces and the old vine Syrah here?
Yeah, this granite is coming from the Massif Central, so in the center of France. And it's the granite you will have on the right side on the Rhône River on our neighborhood of Saint-Joseph. So the character of Clos les Cornirets is have some notes you may find in some Saint-Joseph, with all this concentration, with some black fruit, some spice as well. And on the granite, the Syrah will develop a very thin and elegant structure, and the intensity of the wine will come at the end on very nice and soft tannin.
It's got this. You mentioned there's kind of a licorice quality to it, a very refined. There's some magical spice quality. And as you described it, the bones of this Syrah are so different from the Pontaix. I feel like it's much more linear and much straighter.
Yeah,
it has a silkiness to it at the same time. And you know, I remember you talking about this vintage and even the last few vintages, and when you're there, you can see. And it's similar in other areas of the Northern Rhone, where the vines work their way down into that granite and they find every bit of moisture that they can get. And even in these warm vintages, these sites never suffer, particularly the old vines where the roots have really worked their way down. It's absolutely magical to see the vines, how they find these crevices and cracks, and then if you when you open them up, you can see that little bit of moisture that actually exists in the rocks. And I feel like that's something that gives that lift to the wine, or at least in my mind, that's how I see it. But this is amazing. This 18, it has such a delicacy to it. At the same time, it's got a density and an intensity, and it's a ripe vintage. And we're not talking about something that's light, but it doesn't feel that concentrated or intense. It's kind of a magic act of some kind.
Yeah. In this hot and dry vintage of 2018, in Clos les Cornirets, the vines has had a very nice comportment, and as you said, the rootstocks has been able to find some moisture in the rocks, in the granite, because we have some what we call alterated granite. Mm-hmm. And it will develop some fissure,
some cuts, some breaks.
Yeah, some breaks where the rootstocks will find the moisture. Yeah. So
it's an amazing wine. It really is an amazing wine. You finish on the back, you feel like there's a textural quality to it that almost is like you're tasting kind of some granular aspect of the granite. I mean, that's obviously not happening, but I feel that there's this beautiful texture to the wine that again is completely unique from Pontaix, which also felt lifted, but it doesn't have the same kind of, you described that there is a bones to this site that is very different than Les Pontaix. The fruit is different too. It's a little bit darker fruit.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And wow, really, really impressive. 70-plus-year-old vines. It's yeah. I mean, that's an amazing. I'm very anxious to see. I know you're just beginning and it's a long process, but I think it'll be very interesting to see what some of those terraces up above that have been abandoned that you're going to renovate. It really kind of, because I just think it is a very, very special area. And yeah, I mean, you've got a 0.83 of this historic section, but I'm anxious to see maybe a little bit more added to that upper part over time.
Yeah, like I said before, it was a vineyard a very long time ago, and it was not replanted for up to 100 years now. So we still have a wall with dry what we call with stone, yeah. But it's a huge work to develop a vineyard again. But I'm convinced about it's a very nice place, and yeah, we may have very, very nice complexity in wine in this area. Yeah.
So I want to finish. I don't have them because of the snowstorm. They didn't arrive for me to taste. But I wanted to talk about just briefly. You make very small quantities of a beautiful Hermitage Blanc and Rouge from Les Diognières. Can you just talk briefly? I know the white, the Hermitage Blanc is the 19 vintage, and can you talk about that and just give us a little bit of the history of? I mean, I think on that one you make what, 3 barrels, something like that?
Yeah, we are lucky to have a vineyard in Hermitage, which is a very small appellation, and it's a vineyard which has been planted by my grandfather. So for the white, it's mainly Marsanne. It's around 70 years old Marsanne, which are situated in the lieu-dit Les Diognières. And the whites are planted on the flat part of Les Diognières, where we have some sediment. And in this part of the vineyard of Hermitage, we will develop some nice and intense white, but we preserve a good freshness in the wine. So it makes it very delicate, because you have the intensity of a Hermitage, but with a nice acidity.
So you use only older barrels. I think it's 1 to 2 year old barrels. It's only 3 barrels total. So it's a very small production, and you don't want the new wood to get in the way. But the older barrels give you a beautiful texture to the wine. And it's very old. It's 70, 75 plus year old vines. And as you said, it's kind of a silty, sandy clay, like, it's kind of a lot of the earth and the sediment that's come down the hill over time, because it's towards the lower part of the vineyard, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But thanks to this terroir, yeah, we will preserve this freshness of aromatic we have in Les Diognières white.
And then you have a tiny bit of red also, and that is like the Crozes Reds. That's the 18 vintage that just was released. And again, I think it's you have on this one you have maybe 5 barrels, I think. Is that correct?
It's 5 barrels in a normal vintage, yeah.
The normal vintage. Okay. So tell me about the Syrah here that you have in it's because it's a slightly different terroir. You're in a different section, right, of Diognières?
Yeah, our reds are on the top of the lieu-dit Les Diognières, just very close to the lieu-dit Les Murets. And here we are on clay and limestone, and it's quite very very light subsoil. So we have a very nice expression and concentration of Syrah in this terroir of Les Diognières.
My recollection of the wine is that there's a plushness, kind of it's I don't want to say rich, but it's very lush, and it's kind of got a great kind of it's seductive is maybe the word to use for it. It's a very seductive Syrah, kind of silky tannins, but there still is a nice tension from the limestone.
Yeah, but it's quite very old Syrah. Yeah? It's what we call in French muscle selection. So because these Syrah were planted by my grandfather, and we have low yield on this parcel, around 35 hectoliters per hectare. So it developed all this concentration in the wine, but we have, like you said, this very seductive intensity in the mouth and the thin structure at the end.
There's a beautiful, there's a beautiful texture to it. That's my recollection of tasting it before it was bottled, that it has this amazing texture to it. The very old vines, and if I recall, you don't use new wood on this. It's again, it's like 1 and 2 year old barrels. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which is one of, I mean, really kind of a method that I just feel like you get the texture from the wood without any of the kind of the oak taste, but with the kind of the textural benefits of the oxidation.
Yeah. The idea is to have the right influence on the oak in the wine, and for me, 1 and 2 years old oak barrels are a nice solution, yeah, to age this Hermitage.
Well, listen, Laurent, it's been an absolute treat to talk to you.